ready, Brian? Thank you. We have a few board members.
Lost it.
We lost a
It's like
few.
herding cats.
Okay. Welcome to our December board meeting. It's so nice to see so many people here. We did start the meeting at 6 o'clock tonight. We went into closed session to talk about personnel matters. And now we are back in open session to continue with our meeting. First, I need to have approval of the minutes from our most recent board meeting.
Move approval of the minutes.
Second?
Any discussion on those minutes? All in favor?
Aye.
I need an approval of the agenda,
So moved. Second?
and no additions.
No additions.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next is our public listening session. This is one of the times that 4 times a year we have people who can speak about any item. Each month we can speak about the agenda items. I do have one person who would like to speak to us tonight. Nyla, please.
Hello, I'm Nyla Fry from Waunakee. I just wanted to ask the board if, before you put a policy together for the TIF financing, if the Waunakee School Board is going to have a listening session. TIF financing is an issue that affects all taxpayers, students, and families in the district. It is important that citizens are provided the opportunity to express their opinions pertaining to TIF usage. The usage of TIF financing for development not only affects taxpayers, it also affects the education of our children and the education they will receive well into the future. So I'd appreciate it if you would consider having a public listening session before a policy is written and voted on pertaining to TIFs. Thank you.
Thank you, Nyla. Sure.
A couple things, Nyla, and for others. One of the things that the board is looking at tonight, and they discussed at their previous meeting, really is just some guidelines that we're trying to provide to the representative from the board as they go into the joint review board. So that the joint review board it has all the taxing entities that would be part of the TIF, of which we are one voting party. So what we're trying to do is just provide some guidance to our representative, to that board, so that they really have an understanding as far as what their parameters are as how they vote. As far as some of the public listening session things, I mean, that's part of the joint review board does have a public listening session on each of the TIFs, and that is part of their process. So I think that would be something to look at now as far as how to kind of get your voice out to all of the voting entities, of which we are one of them. But I think as far as the policy piece that we're looking at is trying to develop guidelines that our representative can go there and then make some decisions based on feelings of the whole board. So that's kind of how I'm understanding kind of how we're trying to position ourselves. Here we got a question.
Yeah, I need block.
Oh.
From Northport, and
Go on to the.
as I read the, oh, I need to come up to the mic.
have to come.
I'm sorry.
Yep, sorry.
So I'm Mimi Block from Westport, and I was reading the attachment from last meeting, I guess it was.
Yep.
Position statement, tax incremental districts. And it's my understanding that you want to vote tonight, and I have quite a few questions about it, but aside from that, it sounds like you want to vote to have one person represent the board at other. Actually, that's one of my
Right.
questions.
So-
Where would they,
Correct.
who would be chosen
Right.
What guidance would they be given?
Absolutely.
And also, am I in order to even ask it right now
Sure.
before
Oh,
you
why-
have
Why don't
further
we just
discussion?
answer it, because I think that's a question some other folks have. So
Mhm.
what we have, Mimi, is
Mhm.
is when a TIF district is proposed.
Yeah.
So it originates at the municipality level. So it starts with, in this case, the ones that are up in January are starting at the village level. And then they go through the process at that end. Once they decide that they are going to move forward for consideration of TIF funding, then they have to establish the joint review board. And the joint review board has a representative from the village, a community member, Madison College, Dane County, and the school district. So we have one vote out of 5. And so what we do is we send somebody who represents the school district to that meeting, and then they sit on the joint review board, and then they cast the vote for the school board.
Okay, so again, I'm not sure this is the
Okay.
proper order.
You're okay.
So if it should be discussed during the agenda, do you then, you discuss those things here and give your representative the
When-
recommendation to vote in a certain way, given
When
certain
possible,
parameters?
yeah, there's a general discussion, usually, at least the last ones that have come forward, have been a general discussion around the table as far as what are the different perspectives on the TIF. And then we've really given the power to that person to represent the board's sentiments at the joint review board. What we were trying to do by putting some guidelines in writing was to just provide a little bit more guidance on some specific things that we've discussed around the table. But the ultimate decision power does reside with that person. And we realize that when trying to put things into complete black and white, when there's, as those TIF proposals are moving forward, and that person becomes the individual that becomes, from our perspective, the most informed upon that, can then make a decision based on what they feel is in the best interest of the district. So we've had conversations around our table where we've really felt, if you'd have asked me, we felt one direction. Some new information came out through the joint review board, and we voted differently. So I think those are all part of the process, and we're just trying to provide as much guidance to that individual so that they don't feel like they're without lack of guidance. So that's really what we're trying to
Okay,
promote.
and are you further discussing this during this meeting?
We'll be discussing
Yeah.
the
I don't want to-
guidelines during the open session,
Okay.
because we presented them last time, and then we're asking for general approval of them tonight, because we have the next joint review board gets established in early January.
So the open session is right now?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
So, but that piece is only for the school board's guidance. That's not on the whole TIF. The TIF can only be approved through the joint review board. All we're saying is we're trying to give guidance to that person as they go to the joint review board to then make a decision that represents the school district's one vote.
Julie?
I think those were all excellent questions, and it is a complicated issue. I guess I just would like to say, I think we as a board share some of the concerns that both Nyla and you have brought up. So great questions, important clarification. We get 1 of 5 votes. We have nothing to do with deciding what's worthy of a TIF other than registering that 1 vote. We don't have input in how those TIFs get drafted until we're asked to vote 1 vote of 5.
Okay.
Whether it's a good idea or not, that's it.
How many votes does it take to pass a TIF?
A simple majority.
Simple majority.
My feeling on the guidelines is they really are just guidelines.
Mhm.
And if the timing of the joint review board and our board meetings are such that we can talk about it, we will. Because there are so many issues, as you can see in the document, about, you know, the amount of the TIF, the payback of the TIF,
Mhm.
the contribution to the community. You know, everyone is so different, but sometimes we don't have a meeting between the joint review and the vote. And that's why the guidelines are becoming more important, because these TIFs keep rolling down the road.
Exactly. All right, so, I'm just gonna summarize. It sounds to me like it's only one vote that
Yes.
you're giving guidelines on, one
Yes.
vote of 5.
Yes,
The community itself, another group,
yes,
would have open sessions
Yes.
on the proposals for TIF
yes.
before 5 people come together to
Yes.
vote. Is
I
that
believe-
correct?
Absolutely.
I believe what they do is when they establish the joint review board,
Mhm.
part of that review board has an open session public comments section.
And so that would be a time when the community could come
Right.
together and potentially influence
Yep.
all 5.
Correct, so the last.
Or
Right.
the entire decision process.
Right, so there was a TIF that came, not sure, it was within the last year. We were at the listening session for that, or the public comment section. And from that, the TIF got reconsidered and they didn't move it forward. So there were some things that occurred through the public comment section that influenced whether that TIF moved forward or not. But, so certainly there is that process, but it's with the joint review board because they're the decision makers for those 5 entities that have a voice.
Okay, and without taking more time, is it correct that there is a TIF being proposed and that we'll need a vote on it or a recommendation for a vote in January?
Yes, that's the timeline that they have in place, correct. It's been pushed back. It was supposed to have been earlier, and now they haven't had the meeting to establish the joint review board yet. That's coming, I believe, within the first week of January.
Right, and so tonight, would you be considering that and giving recommendations?
No,
If
right
you-
now, all we're doing is we're just trying to provide guidelines to general TIF conversations that we've had around the table. And then the representative from our board will then go to the joint review board, learn more about that TIF, and then some of that information would come back to us.
Okay, will there be another open session of that larger group?
That will depend on when they actually schedule their meetings for when they're going to vote on the TIF. Part of the reason we put the guidelines together is sometimes these things occur between our meetings, and we want to be able to give our representative at least some guidance as far as what to do.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
Great question.
Mark?
Well, and to add on to the comment, we know there's supposed to be a TIF decision in January. We haven't received any information yet. So, I mean, if we had the information, we could discuss it,
Yeah.
but it has not been presented yet. So we'd be even stricter with the hypothetical tonight until we receive the information.
We have some of the basic information, but it hasn't been presented in its final form to the joint
Right.
review board, which there's sometimes iterations between there. So that would be the official proposal would be at the joint review board.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who would like to speak to the board tonight? Okay, moving on to our report, starting with our student report. Come up, ladies.
I'm gonna stay a little farther forward so I'm not like running right in. Alright, hi, I'm Anaya. I'm Alyssa. And we're the school board reps that represent student council. So we've prepared, I think, 9 different clubs today. So we have a lot of information. And we're gonna alternate so that you don't get bored of hearing one voice for an extensive period of time. So first we have talked at table tennis, and they meet every Monday, so they met tonight right after school for about an hour. And they learned the rules of table tennis, they learned how to serve, and they learned how to play doubles. There are about 12 members, and Mr. Gabriel is the advisor.
Next up is Alpine team. That consists of the snowboarding team and the skiing team into one team that's called the Alpine team. Each team has 3 captains, and their first practice was tonight at Tyrrell and Mount Horeb. And this year, the snowboard captain, Riley Hinckley, designed a new logo for Alpine team, which I have a picture of here if you want to pass that around.
We have a little tiny one on here.
Yes.
Yeah, but then we've got a blown up one for the details. Alright, and the 4-string quartet is another thing that happened at our high school recently. On December 7th, 4 students in the high school orchestra created a group called the 4-string quartet, and they performed at the public library at 7 p.m. The 4 students include Andrew Hall, who plays the violin, Ben Holman, who plays the viola, Alejandro Nate, who plays the violin as well, and Grace Kim, who plays the cello. Grace is a sophomore, and the 3 guys are all seniors. They performed obviously on December 7th. I had the pleasure of going and it was absolutely beautiful. I was so impressed. And they occasionally perform during orchestra concerts. They don't have any future events scheduled at this time, but they're hoping to perform again in the future.
The math team meets on Tuesday mornings and has two teams, a JV team and a varsity team. So all students in FST, which is like a junior math class and above, are in varsity, and all students in advanced algebra, which is a sophomore class and below, are on JV. Mrs. Schrader is the advisor, and there are three captains, Isabel Marsden, Kurt Johnson, and Sophia Liu, who are all seniors. They have 4 meets throughout the year on Wednesdays, and recently on Wednesday they won in the medium-sized school category at La Follette last Wednesday. And there are 4 events in the meet, and 3 of the events are individual, and the last one is a team event, and each meet has a certain category of math. For example, mental math is one of them. I can never do it again. But here's one of our surprise ones. So this is mentioned on there, but there are no details. So the student-directed play is basically exactly what it sounds like. It's a play that's directed by students. And I talked to Alyssa Beery, who's one of the heads of this whole operation, along with Tegan Davis and Maddie Thompson. And the play they're doing is called Almost Maine. There's 9 scenes, and each scene is directed by either an individual student or a group of students, depending on what the scene entails. They did auditions roughly 2 weeks ago, and they have just started rehearsal in the last couple days. The play itself will be showing in February. Warrior Band, which used to be called Pep Band, has started to perform at winter sporting events. Now, not all band students are in Warrior Band. The students in the band perform voluntarily, so if you're in the band, you don't necessarily have to do it. And recently, they performed at a girls' basketball team last week, and their next event is tomorrow at 7:15 p.m. at the boys' basketball game.
We have an update for Spanish Honor Society. So we've been bringing that up the last couple months, but we've been doing a lot of fundraising efforts for Puerto Rico. They've been really busy this month with a dance with Pay It Forward on December 1st that was very successful and a ton of fun. Along with the dance, they've been doing a lot of other fundraising, such as selling wristbands, doing a bake sale, and having a Chipotle night. Our wristband selling, which we sold for $1, raised about $250 around there. It might be plus or minus, we're not 100% sure. Chipotle night raised $68, and Ms. Anderson, one of our advisors, had estimated that our bake sale from last week raised close to $300. And I get to talk again. It's really exciting. So we also brought in FBLA, which is the Future Business Leaders of America, this month, as they are starting a military care package drive for the homerooms. Each homeroom will compete for a Dunkin' Donuts party on December 8th. And what they do is for each item on the list that a student brings to their homeroom earns a point, and the homeroom that has the most points will win the party. They get bonus points for writing handwritten letters to military veterans as well, but mostly it's just canned food, and Alyssa has a list here of all the things that they can bring. FBLA will then be packaging everything that we end up bringing in to send to our military troops.
And lastly, Student Council. So Student Council has started to plan for JBRF. We haven't picked any certain dates for fundraising, but we have had each member pick 2 to 3 local companies to talk to so they can donate items. And a new member, Kate Beckman, came up with an idea called the Chef Brian Pass. So usually there's a really long line at the high school, especially on Wild Wing Wednesdays. And so with this pass, the student will have the opportunity to skip the line, to go to the front of the line to get their food. And so students will pay to have their names put in a basket, and 2 names per grade will be picked, and then they will be able to use their passes once a week. And I'm guessing it's mainly going to be on Wednesday. All the money will help fund future student council events, and in the past, student council has held an event called Open Mic Night, but very little people attended, and so it wasn't a great turnout. So instead, we would like to host a winter talent show. We haven't had many details. We have just started to think of this idea, so there's nothing else to tell about that yet. But lastly, Student Council has also started to plan for our Secret Santa party, which is just fun for in the club where we pick names and exchange gifts.
I think that's all we have for you guys.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being such good little detectives.
No problem. And then all the updates that aren't on the original sheets should be on the shared drive now, so you can look at them and look at the updates as well.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
ladies, awesome. That's great.
And now we have the teacher report.
Some night you're gonna
Do you want us
go
to
before
flip-
those guys.
flip you
because
guys?
it's impossible, I'll just tell you. So Lynn couldn't be with us tonight, so you get me. Two things to report on. One is, since the last time that we talked, we have gone through the recertification vote. Just as a reminder, that's a yearly requirement now. We have to vote with the WERC, and you have to get 51% of all eligible voters, including people who don't vote, counted against you as no votes. It's a whole big process. We have 334 eligible voters, eligible teachers to vote. 316 of those voted, which meant that those 18 people that didn't vote were the no votes. 99% of the people that voted yes to have us be their official bargaining unit. But our official total is 94% because of the no votes. So that just gives us affirmation that teachers really want their voice heard and want their kids' voice heard. So we think that's a real positive thing. It's a pain to do it, but it's a real positive thing to get back. And it's one of the highest in the state. I'll just brag about that. So we feel really strong about that. Our two goals this year, remember, are social justice and joy of teaching. The one thing we're doing for social justice right now is really getting teachers informed about the Dreamer Act and our Dreamers here and what's going on nationally, and writing electronic postcards to our legislators in support of our kids. So that's what's going on with us. Not the big long ones from the students. But
Thanks, Cindy.
Thank you, Cindy. And third on our report list is any board members that might like to report on anything they've done or shared or attended. Peggy.
I had the opportunity to go to the intermediate school digital learning fair. It's always cool to see what's going on there, and I mean, hats off to what your group does in terms of providing these really neat opportunities for students. I mean, there was several different stations, and the couple that I was virtual reality. I don't know if anybody's ever put those things on, but it really it's they were able to do a virtual reality exploration of like Jupiter and other places like that, as well as create their own movies, using some of the technologies that are available. So I think that digital learning fair is kind of a neat opportunity to expose, experiment, and then the students are also the ones who are guiding other students through the exercises and telling them what this does. So I think it's just a great opportunity. I don't know how many years you've been doing it, but it's neat to observe. So if you get the invitation next year, it's always fun to watch.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I got to attend the performance that the Waunakee students did at the high school as a send-off. It was the same weekend as the state football playoffs. So I just really wanted to give a shout out to all the hard work of those students as well. Once again, it was a really wonderful presentation. The costumes were great, and it's just really nice to see the way Mr. Braun continues to find ways to engage so many students in that process and how inclusive that is. Having been a former theater rat myself, I just would speak to jumping in there and trying it. It's a good place to feel at home and explore and find out things about yourself you maybe didn't know. So hats off to those kids. It was a good performance.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I got to go to the forensics orientation meeting where they were talking about what they're doing this year, and it sounds like our middle school is going to be hosting district forensics tournament for the first time in a long time. And the team had about 35, 40 members last year. This year they're up to 80. So it's jumped a lot, which hopefully Brian may have to come and ask us for registration money for some of them. But we'll get that to happen. But I think I was just stunned by being in there. How many of the parents actually showed up to the orientation meeting, which was rare, but it's going to be necessary if they're going to host a tournament, because those are the people who actually have to run the tournament. But it was great to see the fact that they doubled in size in 1 year, so, which is why you're seeing more coaches on the list.
Thank you. Anybody else? Next on the agenda is just to talk about or review the timelines for both the board self-evaluation and the superintendent evaluation. Nothing is really happening this month, just to have it on your radar. I believe the code, we will be doing the, what is it called?
The school perceptions,
School perception.
yeah,
The same as for the self-board one. And we might get those codes out in January?
I think we just received them tonight, so we'll take a look at them, see what the process is, and then assign those codes so that you can get a start on whenever you want to complete those.
Yeah, the reason for it is typically we would be starting some of this process in February, this month by handing certain things out, and we decided to change the process this year.
Yeah, I know we
So
pushed it
basically, it's
back.
February when the tools are gonna be distributed, and so that's the intent of this little overview
Very good.
of when to expect what, as it comes to both the superintendent and the board self-evaluation processes.
Good, thank you. Next, we have the tax increment district proposal.
Yep. So tonight what you're seeing is the slightly revised parameters document that we reviewed last month. We updated it with the feedback that was provided. I think what we had was to have kind of some dates on there, and also that we would be bringing this back on a regular basis for review prior to future TIF discussions. Again, our purpose, and I think we talked about it during some of the public comments, for developing this was to really encapsulate what the comments that have been around the board table with regards to TIF over the last iterations of the joint review board discussions, and wanting to really provide some guidance as for that person who's our rep to take along with them and to utilize as they're learning more about any proposed TIFs that are moving forward. So what we were proposing for this evening was to really, again, have the board review that, provide any feedback, and really to just decide if this is something that you're comfortable with, to then provide in our next iteration to Gary as he's moving forward with joining the joint review board here in early January, and then using this document as guidance. Gary's obviously not here tonight. He did call me at the end of last week and said that he was in favor of guidelines, and thought that what was important to him was that these were just things that were continued to be reviewed as we move forward, to make sure that they were still consistent with thoughts around the board table. But with that, I would open it up to any of the board members for conversation or feedback. And again, what we were looking for was to be able to use a document such as this to then provide to Gary as he joins the joint review board in January, to provide guidance for his vote and his work on that commission.
Mark?
As I mentioned the last meeting, I'm very appreciative of the work that and the clarity of this guideline. I just disagree with our response to scenario number 3. I think we're treating scenario 3 like scenario 2, and I think there's reason to not lock the board member into a no position on scenario 3. I would rather he or she have some discretion with scenario 3. Scenario 2 I have no problem with, and of course scenario 1. I think there are times that we may actually support a TIF that's a mixed-use venture. We actually did a year ago, and there may be a reason in the future not to, or there may be a reason to, and I just don't want to lock that particular mixed-use TIF into the same situation as scenario 2.
I'd like to maybe clarify. One, I think scenario 3 isn't the definition, as you hear, statutorily of a mixed-use TID. A mixed-use TID is normally if it has business and residential combined within the TID.
Right.
That's not what scenario 3 is. So just to make sure, I know some people in the audience are a lot more in-depth into TIDs than many other people usually are. So number 3 doesn't per se take out mixed-use TIDs. What it does is it takes out the mixed but-for test, shall we call it. Our position statement only really looks at the concept of, will a TID occur with or without, will the development occur with or without a TID?
Mm-hmm.
Scenario 1 is clearly the concept that the development won't occur without a TID, in which case it has no effect on taxpayers under the school property tax. Scenario 2 is it's going to occur no matter what. It's just a question of how much money is the cost to the developer versus the cost to the community. Again, it doesn't affect our property tax cap, but what it does is it takes some of the property tax effect off some taxpayers who are within the TID and puts it on everybody else. That's why we say no to scenario 2, because we feel we're hurting some of our taxpayers within the school district at the cost of others. Scenario 3 is basically a combination of the two, where basically you have some part of the development will probably occur without a TID, but some part of the development won't. That's the perfect example is Highway Q. That whole TID in there were residential properties in there that had already sold and were going to keep selling no matter what. The concept was the business part of Highway Q going to happen? By mixing them in together, the but-for test is really diluted. You don't know. It's kind of a mixed bag. So the idea is to say no. Why? I feel the reason you say no is because the village put in a TID that doesn't meet the statutory requirements of the but-for test. Some of this development would happen, but some won't. The village can always go back and change the TID and make it all be one. In other words, none of it will happen if we don't do it. That's what a TID was supposed to be. If they went back and did that, then you would then go back to scenario 1 and you would approve it. The fact that some, and I'm not saying just the village, it doesn't matter which taxing entity it is that's creating the TID, it's the same concept. They created a TID that basically uses part of the statute, but then uses part of an area that doesn't fall under the statute. That's why you say no. It's not about saying there might be a good reason or not a good reason. It just has to do with let the developments that will occur, and let the developments that won't occur and may need help, let them get help. I mean, when I was a liaison last year, I voted half and half. I mean, I voted for one, I voted against one. And now, I don't want everybody to think we're only going to decide this only on the but-for test, because what was the biggest one last year? Biggest one last year had to do with a development that was only going to occur with the TID, but it was going to kick low-income families out of our community because it was going to put them all down and make high expensive apartments out of them that basically we felt was going to hurt our students, and that's why we voted against it. So this is a policy with an idea of here's a guideline, but it's not the only thing.
This is not a policy.
Not a policy.
No.
It's a
It's
yeah.
a
It's a
guideline.
guideline. You're
It's a
right.
position statement.
That's a
It's
better
position
statement.
statement,
Yeah.
providing guidance to.
But it's not an absolute. So the liaison is still going to have to sit there and read through everything and figure it out. I mean, if it was just under this and that was the only answer, we would have been voting for that one on Verleen Street, which would have destroyed all those duplexes and put up more expensive apartments. Because that was not going to occur without the TID. As we saw, the TID got voted down and it didn't occur. So, I mean, again, it's a guideline, but I do think it's important that we vote against these mixed bags of putting in areas that are going to develop anyway to try to make a TID look better for an area that's not going to develop.
So one piece of feedback that I did hear from a board member was, how do we articulate in this document some way that gives, I guess, the power to our delegate to start to discern through some of those kind of questions about payback, dollar amount, public value, et cetera. And some of the things Dave's talking about here, but how do you give, because right now we're making this document, it's relatively black and white. Is there anything we want to put in there? And it kind of goes to your point, I think, Mark,
Exactly.
which was, how do we give some control to that delegate to really be able to make some decisions based on really what they're feeling is kind of the spirit of where it's going, or some things that they feel are important to consider as well. I guess the question would be, do you want some sort of a language piece added to that to provide that level of flexibility to our delegate?
Yeah, I guess what, maybe there's gonna be some phrase or something that's used as it relates to our WASB delegate, because what we do is we come up with a position on any of the resolutions that are proposed, but then basically the individual is gonna learn more when they go to the meetings. There's probably a phrase in that we could add to the last sentence in the position statement that is reflective of the same type of dialogue and then the power of the delegate for this as we do with the WASB resolution.
And I think if, you know, maybe we could put in there that if the timing is such and the water becomes very muddied with, you know, these other issues, that we can still have that discussion at the board level here. You know, they don't have to unilaterally feel that they have to make those decisions if we have timing to come back here. You know, maybe, you know, there is really added community value or such a short payback time, or, you know, there might be positions in there that will cause that person to want to come back and get more of our thoughts. And again, as Dave said, it's more of a position than a policy. Mark?
Okay, so if I'm sitting on that board, and particularly with Verlene Tia that came up, by this policy, I should be voting yes.
Guideline.
This guideline, I'm sorry, but by this guideline, I should say, I should support it.
But then
Even though as
there's-
a school district, we might not. And so, again, that gets back to what I suggested, and perhaps this other board member was suggesting, that there needs to be a statement that there's gotta be, this isn't lockstep, that if in the vision of the board rep, the vote contradicts the guideline, but supports district principles and values, he or she has the discretion to vote in opposition to this guideline. Something to that effect.
You know, I agree with that because you gotta look at the public good. Because, you know, a lot of these kids are trying to promote economic development, bringing companies in, and from a student population standpoint, we're always looking for opportunities for our students to either be mentored or you know, it expands their learning experience. So, you know, I think we've got to look at that as well.
Well, the intent of the document, I thought, was just to articulate some guiding principles that we thought we were helping to clarify. It was never meant to say, this is the way you
No,
shall vote.
It's not
I
a
mean,
flow chart of.
Correct.
But it does say that. It says
It
you will
does.
vote no,
It-
you will vote yes.
Right.
So
If the pieces that are articulated were to be the only considerations, this is how we feel about these particular considerations. If as a whole, other elements are brought into the picture, obviously you are free to weigh those other elements and they may contradict.
Where does it say that though?
No.
You see, you can't create a guideline without that in there.
So is this helping or not? Because we do place high value on the person using good judgment at the time. We're not shy people. I mean, we're willing to give a variety of perspectives. I think that is helpful when we can discuss that, but
I think if we just go into the position statement at the very end, where it says the Board of Education directs the liaison to support, how about just saying instead, the Board of Education provides this guidance for the liaison to
Yes.
support, and then obviously do the same thing in the next sentence. So you're just providing guidance for the liaison to which also makes it clear, given no other relevant facts, we would support a scenario 1. Given no other relevant facts, we would disagree with scenario 2 or 3. Does that make sense? Is that closer, Mark?
It's closer.
I mean, I don't think we can go into every single possible thing.
you can't.
we
You
no,
can't.
you can't, that's the whole.
But I think our biggest heartburn, and most people, when talking about kids who start to talk about it, their biggest heartburn usually comes down to that but-for test. Are we spending tax money to bring a business to the community that wouldn't come if we didn't? I mean, it makes no sense to support, say, well, your point, Jack, about bringing in new businesses that broadens the possibilities for students and everything else. That makes great sense. But if they were gonna come anyway, why did we give them a bunch of tax money? That's like spending money for a basketball program where someone gave you grant money for it, and then you spent more money for it. Why would you do that? The grant money paid for it. You wouldn't. You would let the business do what the business was gonna do anyway.
Well, I think you could argue, you know, we can spend all night on arguing this back and forth, but with the way TIDs are being given out in other communities, you could almost say that the business is not going to come here until that industrial park and that industrial park, and these buildings are all filled. So, you know, we can argue this back and forth all night, but, you know, so the but for could go either way.
So I think we could tweak the position statement by removing we have the word directs. Take Dave's words, which provides this guidance for the liaison. And then I think we could probably also add something that, and I believe, Jack, you used the statement, kind of the public good statement, flexibility to vote. I think we could add something there that basically says, this is your general guidance. It's provided for guidance for our liaison to use as they're voting, and that they also have the flexibility to look at kind of the public good with response to those options. So if we kind of add those pieces within the position statement, does that help to address kind of the conversation we just had for the last few minutes?
One thing that I really do appreciate about this, and why I hope then it probably gets, you know, other people to start reading it, is it provides a nice description of the impact of TIDs on school finance. Because what one area of our district chooses to do in terms of having a TID or not affects all taxpayers in our school district. And I think it's an attempt, you know, thank you, Steve, because you do such a good job of doing this anyway, of trying to also kind of articulate how does this all impact, because we're actually looking at it as how does it affect us in terms of our school finance. It's not just public good, but it also has to do with our resources as well, and being equitable for everyone. So, thank you for that.
Okay, so I think we just update it with the information that Randy has kind of noted, and it isn't really a policy. I don't feel we have to vote on anything. It's just guidance. So I appreciate that feedback. Thank you. Next, we have our strategic planning, starting with Kurt.
As Kurt's coming forward, I just want to share with the board a few things with regards to strategic planning conversations that are coming forward. I appreciate Kurt stepping forward and doing the mental health awareness one tonight. We were initially planned to do multi-level systems of support. Janet needed to, she had some other personal items that she needed to deal with, so we swapped this out last week. So we have Kurt coming tonight, and Janet will be here in January. A few other things, as you see this evening, we'll be talking about mental health, and we'll be talking to Mark Roffers in a few minutes about our long-range facility plans and enrollment projections, et cetera. The next probably 4 months are going to have some pretty high-level and really important strategic planning reports. And as we start to kick off our next budget cycle for the next fiscal year, those are going to be very important pieces that we're going to have to tie together at really the point where we get this spring, when we get to the end of those 4 reports. We'll be talking about facility planning from a district perspective and growth, facility from a maintenance perspective. We'll be talking about some of the items with regards to the budget. We have some technology items moving forward, and we have some items coming out of HR with regards to salaries and benefits. So we put those pieces together. They give us our big picture of some things that we have to start looking at as far as how do all those pieces commingle and exist within our system. So that's really the culminating piece that we're going to be leading up to this spring. So we're going to have a number of these conversations that will be very important as we start to piece all those parts together. But tonight we're going to start with mental health. We've actually been doing some work on this since our linkage meeting here a few years ago, and I think we've made some progress. And Kurt is here to really give us an update of where we are and what's to come.
And the first thing I want to point out is I took some leniency, I guess, to actually change this from awareness to mental health, wellness, and supports, because as I go through this presentation, I hope to emphasize that what we're trying to do in the district is preventive as well as responding to crisis-type situations as they develop within our student population. So we want to emphasize both of those things. So the overview of what we're going to talk about tonight is, I'll show you in just a moment where this fits in the strategic plan, talk a little bit about what it is, what we've done, and some of the things that we are continuing to work on as we move through this. So what I have done is I've kind of taken these two components of the strategic plan and I've put them together. The awareness piece and the school-based mental health services, so kind of blending that wellness component as well as the support services. A couple of other areas that are related to this are developmental guidance and multi-level systems of support, and I will talk about those things just a little bit, but those really are going to be the focus of the two presentations that Janet will be doing in February and then March, or January and March, or whatever those timelines are for those two things. But I will briefly touch on those so you can see how all of the things underneath the student services really blend together and fit together. I want to start out by just running through the Department of Public Instruction's school mental health framework and just point out a few things as we go through that. The emphasis to all of this is that fourth bullet where we really need to tailor these efforts to meet the needs of the students that we have. Because again, on a slide, you'll see that this is a huge continuum of what we're talking about in regards to mental health and services to support and to prevent students and to assist families as well. So this should be familiar. It is our tiered model. So there's the universal practices for all, which is the bulk of what we do. And then of course there are those top layers where we need to do some additional things for some of our students. But it really starts with that foundational principles and practices. And it's really nice to see our principals back here this evening, because as I look down this list of foundational principles and practices, you'll see a lot of the things that are currently going on within the district, and specifically things that all of our buildings do, in particular that positive school culture and climate. We spend a lot of time in our buildings, the principals do, really trying to build that positive school culture and climate, and creating activities and doing things to support making it our schools be welcoming, positive, and just a place where people want to be. Some things that we will be talking about in the years to come are things like culturally responsive practices. We're doing a book study right now at the administrative level where we're really talking about culturally responsive practices, and that will be something that you'll hear more about in the years to come. The other thing that relates to a lot of what is happening within our district is that bullet right one up from the bottom is staff mental health perspective, competencies, staff wellness through professional development and activities like that. We are really focusing on that wellness element because that is so critical for us as a staff and for our students to approach it from that preventive standpoint, because it's a lot more resource intensive when you're trying to respond to the crisis than it is trying to prevent it from happening in the first place. So you'll see an emphasis on a lot of those preventive type things. And this is where it all begins, is universal mental health practices for all. What Janet will be talking about with the developmental guidance is that first bullet under the universal promotes, and it is all about social and emotional competence. The Department of Public Instruction, in conjunction with the Madison School District, have created social and emotional learning competencies. And that is something that our guidance counselors at the elementary level have put into place into their lessons that they do at the elementary level. Yes.
So specifically here, are you talking about things like empathy and kindness?
Yes, yes, yes. And it goes beyond that. It covers all of those things, but it also talks about things that what can you do for yourself when you are struggling, or advocacy skills. It even goes into career exploration kinds of activities, so that students have a better understanding of who they are and what they're able to do and how they are able to help each other, and all of those kinds of things. So what the focus is of the Universal is all students receive this. It's part of our daily activities, it's part of our routines. It isn't something that you go to a special class for or a special program for. It's things that are just embedded into our daily activities. Here are some additional things, and again, some of these things are probably familiar to you. Again, our principals and our school counselors really head up a lot of these activities that happen within our schools and our classrooms on a day-to-day basis. So then you get to that next layer for students who are struggling. Those preventive things aren't really working for them, so what do we do? So we have some things that we put into place for early identification, where we can actually identify students who may be struggling in some of these areas. And then we can use some of our other support staff, our social workers, our school psychologists, to help run some of those group activities or individual work with some of our students as we identify them. And you'll see a common theme through everything that I'm going to talk about tonight is this co-planning and collaboration across students, families, and our community. When I get to the very end, the last few slides I talk about, that emphasis of collaboration is something that we really have to use, because nobody is in a position where they can do all of the work on their own. So then you get to the very top of that triangle, and we have some intensive supports that we have. A couple of things I want to highlight here. Last year, with the school counselors, social workers, and psychologists, we actually developed a suicide prevention protocol where because we get phone calls, emails, students will come in concerned about one of their classmates or themselves. And so we actually have developed a protocol where we can do a kind of an assessment of where a student might be, and then what do we do then to provide assistance for them as well. The other one I want to point out is the reentry plan component and what that's all about. We have a number of students who are being placed in psychiatric hospitals or units for a period of time. So what the reentry plans are, and again, this is primarily the work of our counselors, our principals and assistant principals are involved in this as well, psychologists, social workers, but it's really developing a plan of when a student comes back, what supports do we have to have in place for that transition to be as smooth and positive as possible. And we're just seeing a big uptick in the number of students who are being hospitalized for a variety of reasons with their mental health concerns.
Am I mistaken, or a lot of the situations I become aware of, parents in the community, outside the community, a lot of time these in-house treatments are really not treatments, but they're sort of trying to get control of the situation, but there's not time to treat, you're just trying to get it under control. So is treatment part of that returning, or do they come back with really no treatment in place, and it's just the school's job to try to assimilate?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that does vary greatly. Some students will be in if they're in a psychiatric hospital, Winnebago or Meriter, they may be there for 72 hours and then they're discharged. Many of them come back just like they were never gone. Some of them do come back with other services or programming in place. It just kind of depends on, and I'm going to talk about this as we continue to progress here, the availability and the ability of people to access some of those services that are available, because there are barriers that I'm going to be talking about in just a little bit. So what have we done? I mentioned that the elementary counselors are working on the social emotional learning competencies. We have implemented a universal screening tools in grades 3 through 6, grade 7 and grade 9 this school year. There are different tools at different levels, but we use this to identify students who are at some level of risk, and it can vary as to what area they may be at risk depending on the tool. Generally, they're internalizing behaviors or externalizing behaviors, and then we use that information for our student services staff to provide some level of support for students that do trigger on those kinds of things. The Waunakee Cares Coalition, Brian Kirsten has been involved with that group for a number of years. I've been attending regularly this year, and then one of our social workers comes regularly. And we are doing a lot of joint activities and hosting a lot of joint things to just build that level of awareness and what are we seeing. Looking at some of that Dane County Youth Risk Assessment data, kind of tearing that apart, seeing what resources and services might be available to support kids. Jack was part of the meeting with Unity. Randy and I also met with Dean. And what we learned in those meetings is this is actually a struggle for the health professionals too, because there's a shortage of individuals going into this field of providing individuals with mental health services. And I'll talk a little bit more about insurance and the barriers that happen along those lines. We've added social work time and psychologist time, thanks to the Board of Education approving those FTE increases. And what that's allowed us to do is have more time for our social workers and psychologists to be in particular buildings so that the work doesn't completely fall on our school counselors, because if you remember, our school counselors at that K-6 level are part of the rotation, and their availability is not what it used to be when they're on that 6-day cycle of rotation in classes. So that additional time for our psychologists and social workers has been greatly appreciated. The Building Bridges program, again, that's something that you graciously approved and allowed us to participate, which is a collaborative effort with Dane County. Joel Parisi has stuck a lot of money into his county budget to expand building bridges across the county, and I want to just talk a little bit about that and where we are and what we're hoping that we are able to do. Again, it's that partnership. We have 2 FTE social workers that the county and we have hired through Catholic Charities. One of those individuals is dedicated to an education and consultation with school staff component, and with that we get, as you see on the bottom, 30 hours of staff development. And we will be working on incorporating that now during this next semester in our classes, in our calendar. Our focus with this is, in all likelihood, to provide some building-specific staff development around some of the students that we have, to provide more resources and a better understanding of how these kids can be supported within the classrooms that we have. We are in the middle of our first 90-day cycle with our caseload. It will be wrapping up in January, and then we actually met last week on Thursday, I believe it was, to identify the next group of students for the next 90-day cycle that will happen in February.
So you mentioned about the universal screeners, and then I'm curious with this caseload of 12 students, is that what the program mandates or specifies as 12 students?
Yes.
So are we using the screeners and somehow picking
Yes.
the 12 most at risk?
Yes.
So in theory, in the next tranche, we might have 12 different students,
Mhm.
and there may be different trigger points.
That is very true.
They may be either much more critical, or some may be getting help and preventative services much earlier in the intervention,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
So ideally, how well do you think this 12 student number that we're given to work with serves our population
Yeah.
for our need.
Yeah, I think it works well. It's a number that's established by actually Dane County and Catholic Charities. It's part
Is
of
that
their
based on
program.
our enrollment?
No.
No.
It's based on their experience with the Building Bridges program in the other districts where it started like 3 years ago. and
What their
you're
staff
able-
can handle?
Yes, that's what it's based on. Because things that go along with this, part of what the service coordinator does for some, it depends on families. But if there are barriers such as transportation to get to appointments, the service coordinator is the
Lines that up.
transportation.
Oh.
They're the transportation to the appointments, or arranging if there are other ways to arrange it. Now, everything that you do has a cost to it. So if we're arranging transportation, somebody has to pick up the cost of the transportation. So they might be the one providing the transportation to the appointments, or accompanying the family to the appointment, so that they can then help wrap around other services that might be related to whatever that appointment might be, because of the different factors that go into instability within a family. It's a variety of things that can lead to that instability. And their focus is, as you see that bullet near the bottom, it's a stabilization program for kids and families.
Do some of those 12 repeat?
They can repeat. What we are actually looking at doing within our next cycle is there might be a sibling within the same family who is struggling. So this time we may identify the sibling, but this program works with the entire family. Okay. So I think when we did our first go through last week, I think there were 4 or 5 where we identified a sibling who's in the first round because they felt that we needed more for that particular family. Yeah.
So Kurt, I guess my question, what I'm really trying to get at,
Mhm.
how difficult is it to figure out which of those 12 students?
It isn't really that difficult. Our social workers within our buildings with their counselors and psychologists and principals they're having ongoing conversations about these kids. And then we created a Google Doc that has priority and then potential columns. We didn't have trouble identifying 12. Did we have a lot more?
That's
We-
my question.
We didn't feel, yes, there were more, but we felt within the first 12, we hit our priorities for that 12.
Okay.
And actually, I think in this next, again, we haven't finalized everything, but our initial go-through, I think we had 14 students. And we actually identify like 15 or 16 because one of the requirements is for the parents to consent, written consent to participate. And if they don't, then we have to go to a backup.
Got
And
it.
we did have some families that didn't commit in the first cycle. We're hoping that maybe we can get some of them in our second cycle. So we'll see how it goes. I think we like how things are going at this point. This is brand new to us. Our 2 social workers through Catholic Charities are brand new to the program as well. I do go to monthly meetings of the Building Bridges, Catholic Charities, Dane County, and all of the directors who are participating from the various school districts. We have monthly meetings for this, and then we meet monthly internally as well to talk about how things are going and those kinds of things. I want to take a little bit of time to talk about what happens with some of our students if things are really not going well. There are some day treatment programs that do exist. They try this almost as a first step when things are going, when things are not going well, because they want to try to keep that child in the home, and it's an alternative to that very expensive inpatient care that does exist. So we do have some students who are in day treatment programs. Some of them, because of the program that they might be in, are only here at school for part of the day because the program is a day treatment program, so they might be gone in the afternoon to the day treatment program. Again, there's a lot of collaboration and coordination as the student transitions out of that program back into the school. That generally is, day treatment programs are generally things that are paid by the county or some entity that is funded by the county. It isn't something that we pay for. Residential care centers, on the other hand, could be something that we pay for, and I have paid for those before. We do have some students who have been placed in a residential care center, and that is, they are residents of that facility wherever it may be. There are some in the Milwaukee area. There are some up north where we may place students. Ideally, it's a shared cost. Generally, school districts may have to pay the school portion. The residential portion is usually paid for by the county. It just depends on how the student gets placed in those facilities. But we have had students there, and we will continue to have that as an option of service and programming for some of the students with their most significant needs that we do have. Again, try to make the stay there as short as possible, but it really is all dependent upon how well the student does as to when they can transition back. The last two items are separate slides. I want to talk a little bit about behavior health in schools. This is really taking off in the Madison School District, and it's something that I've talked about in the past. It's actually bringing the mental health services to the students in the school, as opposed to students going to the services wherever they may be. Some of the challenges for this are certainly funding. How does this get paid for? Because as I roll into the very last item, the Children's Mental Health Collaborative, and I talk about some of the barriers, you'll see that funding is not as easy as you think it might be, because insurances don't all work the same way. And they're very, the level of reimbursement is very different than a regular health appointment that you may have. It's just the way it's structured right now. The other big challenge is the sharing of information across the systems, because now when you're talking about mental health providers, in addition to FERPA, which is what schools operate under for privacy, rights and privacy, now you add HIPAA, the medical records protection. And that is much tighter in the ability of individuals to share information across the systems. So we're doing some work actually through the Children's Mental Health Collaborative on behavior health in schools. The Children's Mental Health Collaborative, this is kind of our structure of what it's all about. And what I really want you to pay attention to here is the far right-hand side, which is about our vision, which I'm going to pull that off right now. And this is the vision, that all Dane County youth have the social and emotional wellness to thrive in their home, school, and community. How are we working on this? The Children's Mental Health Collaborative started in 2002, and it is a collaboration of all of the members that you see listed on the top half of this slide. And we are continuing to expand all of these agencies and school districts across our county. In November, the district superintendents invited directors of special ed and student services to their monthly meeting to talk about mental health. And this was one of the points of emphasis that we had as directors, is using this structure to really make a difference in the county to provide services and meet needs of all of the individuals. So our structure is, we have a steering committee. I am a member of the steering committee along with 3 other directors, people from Dane County Human Services, United Way, and some of the partners, the providers, service providers. we meet monthly and talk about different things related to the work groups that we are each chair or co-chair. I'm a co-chair of the advocacy work group, along with the director in Middleton Cross Plains School District. And then other people are part of the supporting best practices, which really focuses on what are the programs and services that we have in place and how can we continue to support those to keep them moving and going forward. The focus of the continuum of care work group is expanding those services and how can we bring in more services and make them available to more individuals within the county. And then, of course, advocacy is exactly what it is. It's advocating for all of these things across our politicians, our agencies, and services so that we can make all of these things work. So here's the nuts and bolts of what's happening. As I said, we do have some day treatment programs, but they're limited in the options that we do have available. Access is a huge barrier across the county and even here in Waunakee. A lot of the services that we have to tap into are in Madison. Well, Madison, while it doesn't appear to be very far away, in reality it is far away if you're trying to access those services in the middle of a school day for some of our students. Talk a little bit about the whole healthcare provider piece and the billing piece. It's just a system that is really hard to navigate and negotiate, and there just are constant barriers for individuals to access services and funding to make this all work. So these are the things that the collaborative is working on doing as we move forward. We need to have that consistent language across all of our agencies because we may be talking about the same thing, but we're using different vocabulary and different words. And we're trying to standardize the language that we have. And then the last one is the big one, is trying to expand our collaboration efforts because nobody can do this alone. We as a school don't have the resources to do it. The county doesn't have the resources to do it. Providers don't have the resources to do it. But I really think if we collaborate, we can emulate a system that's in Hennepin County, Minnesota, where they have services across their county in regards to mental health services. And it is a joint effort by county schools and providers. And it really is the model for the state. And I think it's something that we could do here in Dane County because we do have individuals who see this as something that's very important to the achievement of students and the success of students and just as a whole, the world that we live in today. If we aren't stabilizing mental health, then issues are going to arise and continue to arise. And then since this is one of the areas where we want to expand, we want to get law enforcement involved, we want to continue to expand county and providers. And then that last bullet is a big one. Randy serves on the statewide task force for opiate abuse or opiate misuse. And our politicians need to be part of this and be part of these conversations because they can make a difference. They certainly can make a difference. But we cannot do it alone. There you go. Questions?
I guess I just still would like a better idea of any information you can give us to quantify the problem or the changes in the number of students needing these services over the last 5 years, for instance, or?
Sure. I can get that for you.
I think what Kurt and I talked about in preparation for tonight's presentation was our initial goal was for the strategic plan was awareness.
Okay.
Was basically when we came out of the linkage meeting, the one thing that we heard was we didn't even know this was an issue. So it was we need to bring awareness not only internally with our staff and talk about what's happening, but kind of broader. What's occurred is I think there was a lot of synergy that came out of that. There was a lot of ideas and there were some programs and some awareness that happened in a broader scale that allowed us to move faster. So that's definitely some pieces. But yeah, we can bring back some of the numerics as far as kind of what our student service piece looks like.
Yeah, we can use some of our universal screening data. We are in the middle of preparing to give the Dane County Youth Risk Assessment again. We give it in 2018 at the middle school and the high school, so we would have that data again to supplement the 12 and 15 data that we have, so
That
we
would
can
be
see
great.
some trends and patterns.
Yep.
We can bring that back to the board, later this spring after we give it.
When Kurt presented to the Dane County superintendents, I mean, I think we're sitting in a very good spot. One, Kurt's done a great job. He's one of the leaders of that collaborative effort in trying to push that piece forward and presented really kind of the work that they're trying to do. And when you look at kind of the broad spectrum of where districts are, you have, I would say, 3 or 4 main drivers within that collaborative. And I think in many of the other districts trying to figure out where do they start. So I feel like we're in a good position as far as where we're at, with a long way to go.
Mark, did you have a comment?
Yeah, a couple. One, thank you so much for sharing where we are. We've gotten a lot of verbal indicators through meeting the different buildings about the needs, but seeing a picture of how we're responding to them and appreciative of all you've done in the district with collaboration with Dane County, we're in a very, I agree, we're in a good spot. Question is, do you see the bridges staying within the pre-K 4 to 8 range because there's other services available, 7-12 or 9-12?
Yeah, we, just about every month when we meet, we talk about what is there for the high school. The Bridges that county really and Catholic Charities don't believe that the model will work at a high school level. I don't know that all the directors necessarily agree with that, but that's what we have right now. I think what the behavior health in schools component maybe is something that could be developed into a more middle school, high school service that might pick up that void, I guess. That's the belief, at least. It's more targeted at middle school, high school.
And the third thing, last month we talked about how do we speak to our community. This, to me, would be a neat thing to share with the families, because one of the things I've heard anecdotally, more even out of district than in district, is just the extreme frustration of families who don't know what resources are available, and they're just stymied with the problem themselves. And so to have, as a board, if we could somehow share some of this with the community in one of those quarterly, this would be a good piece to share, I think.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Kurt.
Thank you.
Kurt.
Thanks, Kurt.
Long-range growth planning.
Well, reintroduce Mark Roffers. He's, if you recall, last spring when we were really going through some of our facility and our enrollment projections, one of the things that we decided as a group to do was to really revisit our long-range facility plan. And so we re-engaged with Mark as far as after his last update last winter, and he's done a full-blown review of where we sit, what are our projections, and that's what he's here tonight to share with us. There's going to be a lot of information as part of this, so this won't be the only time we'll be talking about it. We'll be bringing this back at different increments throughout the year, and certainly it'll play a big part into our conversations as we go into the spring. So, Mark?
Thank you, Randy. And to that point, I'll work my way pretty quickly through this presentation. I don't think our Tribune reporter is writing fast enough, so I got to test them a little. And secondly, for those of you wanting more information, there's a 40-some page report that's also in the packet, and certainly will be available for review and digestion over the course of the holiday season. So with that, I'll start with the presentation here tonight. And what I hope to cover is to just take us a step back, or a year back, as it were, to talk about what direction we got from the board back in 2016. Based on that direction, to present a little bit about the current housing and demographic picture that we've uncovered, present our updated student enrollment projections, and talk about some potential implications or tweaks to the long-range facility plan that the projections might suggest. So first, talking a little bit about the direction we got back a year ago, and actually a few years ago, the board will recall the board adopted a long-range facilities plan or study that included a plan, and following that executed the first steps of the plan, resulting in the new intermediate school and improvements to two of the elementary schools. That plan had more in it, has more in it. It's a 15 to 25 year plan for the school's facilities. And the suggested steps in that plan for the decade between 2020 and 2030 included a particular focus on keeping our eye on middle school enrollment growth. And in fact suggested that given the projections we made back then, and actually a few years before 2014, that we might need a new middle school sometime around 2020. So that certainly suggested we needed to talk about it seriously now, because to get a middle school built is a few year lead time kind of effort. The other ideas with the facilities plan is once that new middle school was built, the old middle school could serve to relieve high school enrollment across the way when that became an issue sometime around 2030 or so. Then the final step suggested in the 2014 facilities plan was around 2025, given the projections at the time, there was an expectation for a fourth elementary school to serve south side projected growth. So that's where we were in 2014. This is a reminder again that this is the idea with your strategic plan is that the board would revisit this facilities plan and the projections behind it at least once a year to monitor progress and to identify next steps. So as part of that review in last December, the board agreed for us to do a few things. First, to look at what kind of student generation are we getting from new single-family housing. Steve has done this a few years over the or a few times over the past several years to survey new home builders, new folks that have come into the community to ask them these types of questions. We're also looking in particular on middle school and the middle school enrollment growth, what impacts the current bubble might have on the middle school, and more importantly, what do we expect for middle school enrollment growth and change over the next several years. And then the idea was to come back together here tonight and talk a little bit about what the implications might be. Before I get into the projections, I want to talk a little bit about the demographic picture in your community, because it is interesting and it is changing from what we observed in the past. As you know, Waunakee and to a somewhat lesser degree, Westport experienced significant single-family housing construction between 1990 and about 2005. The biggest in its history. The community grew very rapidly at that time. Keep that in your head, because that has implications as we talk about enrollment in the future. Now, more recently, over the past 3 to 4 years, we've seen a rebounding, certainly in growth and development. Within single family, the village of Waunakee has been averaging between 90 and 95 homes per year. Westport's quite a bit down from that. Bishop's Bay hasn't kicked in Westport yet. There hasn't been a lot of new development there. In the city of Middleton portion of the Waunakee School District, Bishop's Bay has kicked in, and we have seen about 25 new single-family home starts per year over the last few years. One of the other things we're seeing in terms of change in the housing market is a little bit more multiple family housing construction in the past. That's particularly been focused in downtown Waunakee and in Bishop's Bay, but we're starting to see new multiple family proposals maybe bubbling up in other parts of the community as well. The other thing to note about the Waunakee market is for sales of existing homes, it's the most expensive market in the whole county by a fairly significant margin. So your housing values are strong and pretty high. In terms of population change, we have seen with that new housing development, the village's population growing about 10%. But interestingly, the percentage of the population that are in your biggest age group of concern is decreasing as a portion of the total population. And since about 2009, total births in your school district area is pretty flat each year. In other words, it's not increasing. Even though we're seeing some new housing construction, you remember again, a lot of that new housing growth from 1990 to 2015, who bought those homes, who built those homes. In many cases, they're not having more kids anymore. And so what we've seen is that the number of kindergarten students have only fully replaced the outgoing seniors twice in the last 10 years within your district. So this is some of the pictures that tell the story. This is from the Applied Population Lab, and it's the age pyramid from the early 2010s up through 2015. And what I've highlighted there is that the population, female on the right, male on the left, within their primary childbearing years is the smallest age groups you have, more or less, until you get into the elderly folks. So that's the picture of a significant population, but with the bulk of them being in the 40 to 69 age set. And that plays out in the birth trend. The number of total births, which is the vertical or the y-axis in this chart, peaked in the 2004 to 2007 or 8 time frame within your district, and has slowly declined since that period of time. This is not birth rate, this is total births that we're seeing in your district. This is another chart from the Applied Population Lab, and they're projecting that trend out, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later, because it's noteworthy in terms of what it includes and what it may not include. And this is that kindergarten chart. So the blue line over the last 10 years is the number of seniors that are graduating, and the red line in the same year is the number of kindergartners that are coming into your schools. This is a garish chart, but it is intended to represent what's going on with people that are building new single-family homes, particularly in the village of Waunakee. And the numbers I've attempted to highlight there are the ones I'd like you to focus on. Since the district began this type of survey in 2005, then 2008 and 2010, we saw an uptick in the number of Waunakee Community School District students per housing unit, per new single-family house. But what we saw when we just did this survey with a lot of help from district staff was a decline. So whereas we were coming close to one new school district student per house in the 2010-28 time frame, we're about 0.75 kids per new single-family house, which is significant. It's a significant change and decrease, and something that we need to account for when we're thinking about new single-family growth and what it really is going to mean for the school district. So you multiply 0.76 by 90 to 95 homes versus 0.94 times 90 to 95 homes per year, and it starts to matter. So this is our kind of demographic summary, and in summary, the households in your district are getting older and smaller. People who moved here in the boom of the 1990s and early 2000s, they're all still here, but increasingly in empty nester households. They're the households where of the blue line 12th graders that are graduating each year. My little footnote, though, is hold on until after 2025, 2030, when those houses will be 30, 35, 40 years old. And the folks living in them will be 65, 70, 75 years old, or more likely starting to think about moving to a different house. The other thing that I'd like to share with you or remind you is new housing growth has been strong recently. But there's two things to kind of keep in mind there. There's fewer children per housing unit than in the past, we found with this new survey. And there's more multiple family as a percentage of total housing units. And for your school district, and most any school district, new multiple family housing per unit generates only about 10 to 15% of what a new single family home generates in terms of school kids. So we certainly took this information, as did the Applied Population Lab, and applied it to our thinking as we reprojected housing unit and enrollment growth for your district. So we've shared a little bit about what our methodology has been in the past. I'll try to be quick about this. The Applied Population Lab and we both updated projections. We use pretty significantly different methodologies to do that. Our methodology is based on housing unit growth and change. We project through the year 2030 in 5-year increments, roughly speaking. So we have a 2020 projection, a 2025 projection, and a 2030 projection. We have a nice, rich history of how different parts of the community are changing in terms of student generation now with the work we've done over the years. So we know that, neighborhood 46 has had more and then less students per housing units, and we can see those kids growing up as we look at our numbers over the years. So that's been really helpful. And so what we did this time, like we did back in 2012, 2014 timeframe, is compared projections with the capacities of your existing schools to identify where and when they might be exceeded.
Before we get into the projections,
Yeah.
maybe your numbers include this, but do you factor in history of new students moving into the district on a yearly basis? I mean, so for example, the intermediate school picks up X number of students on average per year.
Mm-hmm.
That's above and beyond whatever is in the housing projection. There's a history of how many kids per school go up every year. And as a result, could those numbers, if those aren't factored in, could the outcome be different, the projection be different?
Well, if I understand your question correctly, I can start to answer it by saying that my projection methodology has very little to do with how schools' enrollment has increased or decreased in the past. It has everything to do with how I expect new housing growth to generate new students, and how I expect existing neighborhoods to either generate more or fewer students depending on where they are in their evolution. So this is not where I take a line from the past and I extend it to the future. That's not what my projections are about. APLs are a little bit more like that, where they look at past trends, they progress students through the various age groups, they assume a certain rate of progression or in-migration. They take the recent birth rate and try to project that forward. So they're looking a little bit more at past trends than I am, but I look at them to gather insight, but they do not really influence the projections directly.
Okay.
So what we did is subdivided your school district into 53 different neighborhoods. I think when we first did this, we had 51. We added a couple, subdivided things in slightly different ways based on how development has actually occurred, and we project it to occur. But we've done it in such a way we can compare the neighborhoods in the past to the neighborhoods of the future. The different colors on this map represent the different elementary attendance areas for the schools, which is noteworthy as we look forward with the projections. In general, we start with housing projections and then work towards enrollment projections from that. Generally speaking, as we talked to the municipalities, as we talked to developers and key residential builders in the area, there's a general optimism that the current pace of development will continue, if not accelerate a little bit. Two concerns that were raised by more than one person. The first concern is, we may be due for a correction. What they hope to be a 12 to 18-month break, but the current pace of housing development may not continue consistently through the year 2030. The second concern that was raised by a couple of people is that the housing prices is the price of housing in the Waunakee, Westport area getting so high that the market for that housing is going to start shrinking as household incomes in general in the county on a real basis have not increased substantially over the last 10 years. Also an overview, there's new housing projected on all sides of the village over the next 10 to 15 years, and also certainly Bishop's Bay at the south edge of your district. And what we can expect is a greater percentage of multiple family units in the past, and what you've seen is that some of those units come in big chunks, 75, 100 unit projects occupying maybe 5-10 acres of land. This is a chart that probably warrants more time than I'm going to be able to give it today, but what I'm trying to show here is over the next 12-year period, or at least through 2030, the different developments or subdivisions, if you want to call it that I expect will come online. Some of them are already online, and when I expect them to build out their housing. So there's 12 areas. The numbers represent the neighborhoods on the maps that I have. And in generally speaking, I think with a significant degree of confidence that we'll have 5 to 7 new subdivisions or existing subdivisions selling homes each year over the next several years. These are projects that for the most part have either already been fully approved or are well on their way to being approved. So what are the details of our housing projections? In total, we're projecting about 3,500 new housing units per year. What does that mean? About 270 housing units per year. So, and what we're thinking is about 2/3 of those, a little bit less, will be single-family homes. So if you want to kind of compare them to those numbers you saw earlier, I'm testing myself here. It's about 2/3, about 170 or 180 units per year, about single-family housing units compared to some of those numbers you saw. So projecting the Waunakee numbers to stay roughly where they are, maybe about 100 units per year. Bishop's Bay picking up as new components of the Bishop's Bay development come online, including those in Westport that will see new houses cropping up in next year. Significant multifamily growth still. New housing growth projected to mainly be in the current elementary attendance area. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. For Heritage, I'm sorry. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it as we go forward.
Yeah, so Mark, you're saying 270 units per year, and then you showed a chart that there's about 0.75 students per household?
0.75 students per new single-family household. This 270 number includes single and multiple family.
Oh.
And before anyone starts doing the math there, you also have to consider the thousands of housing units that are already on the ground and either generating more or fewer housing units. So you can't just multiply 170 by 0.75 and get the picture. That vastly overestimate students. So this is the details, I suppose, behind the numbers. There's a lot more details behind this information, but just showing that in terms of housing unit growth, if you look on the right-hand column, most of the new housing units are projected to be in the Heritage attendance area. The south side area includes Bishop's Bay, Kilkenny Farms, newer development around the or the intermediate school that we're anticipating, and others. This map, you see a clearer version in the report, but it's a heat map, so the areas that you see in the hotter looking colors, the reds and oranges, are where we expect the most significant housing unit growth over the next 10 to 15 year period.
Mark, and then I'm assuming that neighborhood across from Arboretum, that we didn't even have that in our last projection.
No, we did not.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're a good segue, because I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and the backstory to that is that based on a developer request, the Village of Waunakee changed its plan. That area was anticipated for business or non-residential development. It's now anticipated for still some of that, but also for single and perhaps some duplex and multiple family development too. So it will have an impact on Arboretum. We'll see that in the next several slides. So what's the bottom line in terms of how that translates to enrollment projections? So I'm transitioning here from housing to enrollment. So for enrollment, we're projecting an increase of about 1,100 K through 12 students in Waunakee School District schools by 2030. Seems like a big number, and it's a pretty big number. It's about 90 students per year. Over the last 4 years, I think the district's been adding about 60 to 80 new students per year, so it's maybe a slight uptick above what you've been seeing recently.
How do you come up with that, though? When you show that we're not adding more kindergartners, you know, we're getting rid of more seniors, graduating more seniors than adding kindergartners.
A couple things. We've got new single-family housing developments coming online, more than we've had, and we in the community of Bishop's Bay, in the southern end of the district, starting next year, we'll have 3 locations where single-family homes will be available. 2 of them are in Westport. They're called the Farm and the Prairie. One of them is the sell out of the back 9. Once that sells out, there'll be a likely new housing growth in another part of the Middleton portion of Bishop's Bay. So a new housing unit growth in those places are going to, in my estimation, drive some of that enrollment increase. Now, the applied population projections have a little bit different picture. We're going to see them. That suggests that enrollment growth will not be significant, and well, I'll explain why in a second.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah. That being said, that is a decrease compared to the projections we made back in 2012. In 2012, we projected about 5,400 K through 12 students by 2030. At that point, we were operating on this assumption, well, we've got a kid per new housing unit, right? And the trend that we were looking at there was, didn't include it included the growth in live births. It didn't include some of that trickling over the last few years that we've seen. So we did adjust our projections, Jack, to deal with some of the things that you're observing, and adjusted them downward. So this is a heat map showing enrollment growth. And the little numbers that you see there indicate the total number of additional K-12 students, or in certain cases fewer K-12 students that we anticipate within each of the neighborhoods. So this is an interesting, the area I picked to blow up was by design. It shows in neighborhoods 5 and 35. 35 is Kilkenny Farms. So, there's still houses to be built there, little sisters and brothers to be born, and significant growth in students to occur there. Meanwhile, to the east, where a lot of the housing units were built, again in this 1990 to 2005 time frame, the kids are growing up, growing out of school, and so while we certainly expect those houses to be active places, they're going to be a little less active than they were or are today. And so we are expecting actual enrollment declines in some of those neighborhoods as we look forward to the year 2030. So we take all that, mix it all together in a soup, and come up with a enrollment projection for each attendance area and for the district as a whole. The hot spots in the village of Waunakee, I've mentioned a couple of them already. Kilkenny Farms, neighborhood 35, neighborhood 5. To the west is another pending Don Tierney development, at least at this point in time, called Woodland West. It abuts the intermediate school site ultimately. The northwest part of the village of Waunakee, continued growth and potential expansion there. The Arboretum, what's being called Arboretum Village, north of Arboretum Elementary, is the other red spot you see on the east side of the district in the north area. So certainly developments within Waunakee that will take the place of some of the existing ones that are filling up. And then the Bishops Bay area. Actually, the hot spot, the red spot there is an area that's 100% cornfield now, but anticipated to be a significant single-family growth area as that development builds out moving into the future. So here's the picture as I projected for the different grade groupings. So in the K4, we're projecting between now and 2030 about 500 new K4 students, mostly in the Heritage attendance area. This is by design. What does that mean? Well, Heritage has the greatest excess capacity currently. It's going to take some remodeling of some additional classrooms to fully realize that. But that's one fact. It currently serves as a Southside school, so many of those kids are going there, and as a result, as we've been thinking about planning for the fourth school, ultimately, it's been envisioned by the 2014 facilities plan. It'll be somewhere on the south side, thereby relieving Heritage of that enrollment growth. What we didn't anticipate, and what Peggy mentioned, is that this new area just north of Arboretum Elementary School would generate additional school kids. I forget the exact number, it's in the reporter. If you squint, it's on that map. But certainly well over 100 kids in an area where we expected none. And the development that could come online in the near future, next few years. And we would expect, given its location in the community and the market I think it's targeting, for it to generate a lot of school kids. So this is the elementary projection. So the Heritage overage that you see here on this map we anticipated that back in 2014. What we didn't anticipate, or I guess what we hoped would not happen, is that Arboretum would not continue to grow because its capacity is less, of course, significantly less than the other two elementary schools. So the red number I see there, that you see in the 2020-2021 time frame of projected Arboretum growth of about 50 kids, we didn't anticipate back in 2014. This is new information for all of us. The other thing to keep in mind when looking at that 452 number for Arboretum in September 2017 is, as I think you know, that's the result of decisions to shift some of those kids in that natural attendance area to other schools. I didn't do that with the 505 number. The 505 number is just all those kids that are projected to live in the attendance area attending Arboretum school. So just you keep that in mind. This is showing the same information in a little bit different way. The projected K4 enrollment compared to the capacity of the existing schools. Each school has a capacity range, kind of an ideal capacity and a maximum capacity. That range is the darker band you see near the top of each of these graphics, or this one at least in particular.
That capacity number is based on already remodeling Heritage though, right? It looks like?
It's based on additional remodeling of Heritage.
So it's based
classrooms.
on fully utilizing all three elementary schools?
That's right. So here's the number right there. So neighborhood 30, this is the Arboretum Village area straddling Hogan Road. The actual nearer term development is projected to be on the west side of Hogan Road, but this village's comprehensive plan shows additional residential development on the east side of Hogan, due north of the Arboretum School as well. So there's 115 K4 students coming out of that neighborhood that I'm projecting by 2030, above the 0 that are coming out of that neighborhood right now. For the intermediate school, good news, what you built is going to last for a while. We're certainly projecting continued growth in grades 5 through 6, but the current intermediate school should provide enough capacity through about the year 2030 for that. And as you all know, it was built to be added onto, and that would extend it out quite a bit further. And here's the picture for intermediate school projections versus the capacity range of that school. In most cases, the grade maps look pretty similar to the overall K through 12 enrollment projections map. There are certain cases where you can spy or spot where the current elementary kids are growing up and growing out. Okay, the middle school. So we are certainly projecting additional middle school enrollment growth through 2030. Over the next few years, we're expecting it to be pretty low for a couple of reasons. That birth rate is certainly, or will certainly be affecting the middle school as those kids grow up, and as these smaller kindergarten classrooms that we saw in large part are certainly going to affect that over time. So what we're projecting is that the middle school should be under its capacity, especially if you consider the 2 portable classrooms that are there for the next few years. And what we're projecting here that's different than the last report is that the capacity of the middle school would be exceeded maybe around the 2025 time frame as opposed to about 2020. So a big middle school project is probably not on the horizon to build a new middle school is, I suppose, the headline for tonight's presentation. So this chart is a little bit different than the other 2. It shows within the darker pink band the capacity that the portable classrooms there provide, about 50 additional kids. So from the Epstein-Ewen work, capacity work that was done in conjunction with the long-range study, the capacity of the middle school was pegged at 672 kids. The school's been operating close to that capacity for the last few years. My projections suggest it'll stay operating close to that capacity for the next few years. And then when some of this new housing development in Bishop's Bay and other places starts to take off, that we would expect that enrollment to grow beyond that capacity.
In your study, did you look at the average price of the houses that are going up? Is it still in that 450 to 500,000 range, or is it starting to come down into the 350 to 400?
I didn't study that. There's not a significant difference on the horizon. There are some developments where there's an effort, and Arboretum Village is one of them, I think, to target slightly more affordable houses, down in the 300, 350 range.
The one thing, what I heard from the recent trends with the recent construction, I heard the number 475 for a new home. That was the average.
They can't afford children.
Yeah.
Yeah, they can't afford kids, that's what's trying to get done.
So this is where the middle school kids are coming from in my projections, at least. High school, some more good news. The high school should still be under capacity through the year 2030, you know, even given the enrollment projections that we're making. It'll start to get feel certainly more crowded with 250 more kids in it over time. So some of the stress that I think the middle school is experiencing right now, you'd start to experience at the high school level. This is the map that goes along with high school enrollment growth. And these are the numbers associated with the grades 5 through 12, comparing projected enrollment with capacity. I think I had a misprint earlier in terms of middle school enrollment growth. The actual projected enrollment growth is this 138 number on this page, so I'll make sure to get that fixed. As I mentioned earlier, the Applied Population Lab, in parallel to us, did their own enrollment projections. We shared some basic information, but basically Sarah and her crew did their own thing without talking to us, and we did our own thing without talking to them over the course of the fall. I talked about their methodology. It's different than ours. They look at growing the existing kids through the schools over time, and they also look at birth trends within the Waunakee school district. I think it's noteworthy that the APL projection model didn't factor in future community and housing growth associated with Bishop's Bay. So if they were just looking at past births, and there hasn't been many births in Bishop's Bay, and in fact they didn't include the city of Middleton at all in their birth numbers, so that wasn't factored in at all. So I think that'll play out a little bit in the numbers that you're going to see. A lot of information on this chart, but one of the things that I want to draw your eye to is that the Applied Population Lab is actually projecting a scenario of declining enrollment for your district. Basically flat enrollment through the year 2025.
But
So
you're saying their methodology is based on birth rates and actually doesn't include new property development.
That's accurate. It's based on past birth rates within the community, the main communities that make up your district. Waunakee, Westport, I think Springfield, it was included in that, maybe Dane or Vienna, but it doesn't include births in the city of Middleton, any part of the city of Middleton.
So as long as we talk the village and all those communities who are not giving out any permits, we're basically going to have a flat population. That ought to work.
There's certainly a connection there.
Yeah.
So what are the implications of the projections on the long-range facilities plan? You remember, many slides ago, I presented the facilities plan for 2020 to 2030 back from 2014. So what is that? What are we thinking about now, or what do we like to start the discussion with you about here tonight? The fourth elementary school, the need might be pushed back a little bit. We thought back in 2014 that we might need the fourth elementary school around the year 2025. It might be 2027, 28-ish, depending on a number of different factors. But before then, we're going to be dealing with an imbalance situation. I didn't talk about it when I had the slides, but you probably observed that we had capacity at Prairie. Because most of the new housing growth is not in Prairie's elementary. It's not happening on the north side of the district by and large. But we do have an unexpected enrollment growth at Arboretum. So additional work needs to be done to kind of balance that kind of thing. So there could be the current practice of reassigning new students that would normally attend Arboretum to other schools could continue and maybe have to be increased. We could look at the attendance areas again. The district did rebalance the attendance areas a couple of years ago in response to the added capacity at Heritage in particular. Could be revisited once again. And whatever the case is, Prairie Elementary School is the most logical recipient of some of those students given what we were seeing in terms of Prairie's attendance area growth. One of the other things we see at the K-4 level is, in order to accommodate, I mentioned this already, heritage projections, eventually additional classrooms of the old intermediate school would have to be remodeled to accommodate the heritage students and the growth in heritage students. So that was a K-4. At the 5 to 12 level, intermediate school is taken care of, again, based on the current projections until about 2030. At such time, the already anticipated classroom expansion could be made to carry it forward in several more years. There's no need at the present time to commence planning for a new construction of a new middle school. However, as I was talking with Steve and Randy, there could be a possible near-term middle school project in the next few years. As I understand it, the middle school is the only school building without a secured entry at present. If that were added, there could be a minor expansion of a few classrooms, permanent classrooms, to take the place of the portable ones, for instance. That could postpone the need for a new middle school for a few more years beyond what the current projections suggest, maybe to after 2025. And at that point in time, the timing of the new middle school could maybe be better calibrated to when some additional high school capacity is needed to therefore take over some of the current middle school space.
I can just add, Mark, when we defined the secure entry, that was really with regards to having a primary entry to the school funneling through an office. So you had that level of an entry to the school. So we have the buzzer systems, the camera systems, et cetera, at those schools, but that's our only school right now that we haven't either built or remodeled to have the aspect of funneling traffic through an office facility.
Thank you.
If I go back to your slide about enrollment versus capacity in the middle school, you were showing basically we're crossing the line, even with the portable classrooms, somewhere in 2024, somewhere in there, just before 2025.
Right.
Now, since a referendum takes us about 2 years to get ready and set up and get going, and it takes about anywhere from a year to 2 years to build it, that means you got to start it 4 years before you want it, which means you're starting in 2019, which is in a year and a half. Yet we're saying we don't really need to start thinking about this. I'm just saying, if I'm backing up the time frame, I'm saying if we're not starting to put this together by 2029, we're going to miss.
2019.
2019, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
2029 would be better.
I definitely think you should continue to monitor enrollment growth. I don't know. You see that straight line between 656 and 735?
Yeah.
I don't know that that's a straight line. I just connected 2 points. It could be a curve.
So it could start going up sooner, but it might flatten out the difference between 20. But either way, by 2024, you're figuring we're getting over.
Yeah, I don't mean to suggest that you shouldn't keep your eye on the middle school. We thought last year at this time we may start to, like right now,
Need to be doing
start
it, yeah.
start planning for a new middle school, and I don't believe you need to do that. And I believe you could start talking about other projects to extend the life of the middle school just a little bit more if you wanted to.
One question, Dave, maybe, what do we want? I mean, there are some things that when we look at the current middle school building, that the long-range plan calls for that to become eventually part of the high school.
Right.
Part of those things have some amenities that whether it's part of the high school or it's part of the middle school situation, we would want to do. So the secure entry was an example of something we've talked about in concept in the past. Just by doing that, you add capacity to the middle school by reconfiguring some of where the current office is. That may bring you up to, so something on the interim level that's not building a brand new school, that would be adding amenities to the current facility that I think we would want to be considering, could extend out when we actually have to build a brand new school for the middle school. So those are some of the things that I think this report will lead us into some dialogue about, is how do we really want to handle those and what's our timing of how we want to approach them.
The other thing I'll offer is that, again, if the Applied Population Lab does a good job, and if they're, they didn't factor in one thing, but if their projections are more accurate than mine, I can tell you the 2025 number for the middle school is less than 735. So I think it's something that the district needs to keep its eye on. Again, there's this annual review built into the strategic plan. Let's look at what the September counts are next year, the year after that, to see what the trend is.
So what would you estimate, you know, you put this secured entrance in, you probably put on 2 or 3 classrooms.
I had 4 classrooms, yeah.
Four classrooms.
100 kids.
100 kids. What kind of cost is that? Is that in the 10 million or 50 million?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I don't know, Jack. I'm guessing it's in the.
Price per square
The
foot?
thing is with the middle schools, it's a lot more complicated question than most schools because it's 2 stories. So you start looking at, when you're saying adding 4 classrooms, how you add them matters a lot in that cost factor. If you're really talking about not just changing the entrance, you're talking about literally doing an addition. That's a significant concept that can go just about
Would be-
up or down.
Yeah, it'd be interesting.
I thought
just-
when we did the high school, the entrance area alone was like $3 million. I'm trying to pull from.
Well,
Well, it'd be
the 4
interesting
classrooms
to
at
just go out
4
there
classrooms at Prairie.
and
What was that?
say what's that gonna cost, you know, just get some estimates. You know, so that,
The classrooms at Prairie were 4? That's what I was thinking. That was with all some of the facility improvements too, so I think that was like $3 million, was at that level of improvement.
but
Yeah.
that's the total cost of that, right? So you're looking at about 7, 10 million. Just rough.
Sure. I think then you pair that in with some of the things that Mark was talking about with heritage and some of those other pieces that help you then to expand your capacities out. I think that's the conversation and some of the dialogue you may need to have in this interim period that Dave's talking about, that 1920 timeframe is this really leading us to a conversation about needing a new school, or is it looking at some sort of an interim step that addresses some of these things that can still add capacity?
I think the long-range facilities plan was painted with a broad brush.
Yeah, sure.
And it was, and the broad brush still suggests we're gonna need a new middle school, we're gonna need a 4th elementary school. The timing might be a little bit different than we thought. The timing potentially could be flip-flop between those 2, major building projects. But the broad brush strokes of that facilities plan, I think, are still alive. And I think I anticipated that we have these kind of dialogues. You weren't gonna come here tonight if I would've said, well, you're gonna be at 7:35 at the middle school in 2020. I'm sure you wouldn't have just said, flip the switch, let's start building a new middle school. There was gonna be a, extensive amount of discussion that was going to need to happen. And so, this is perfectly within that range of discussion here tonight.
Mark has a comment.
Yeah, first of all, I think there will need to be some rich discussions about any remodeling at the middle school, because the classrooms will only be temporary middle school classrooms. And so I would hope the vision would be for what's beyond the present need, if that should come to fruition. Secondly, looking at Heritage Elementary, when we look at the functional maximum number, I'm assuming we're looking at a 6-track,
There's 6-track.
and those rooms are sort of allocated at this point, but some may need some work before that becomes a reality.
Absolutely.
And so, to get to Dave's point about the 2025 period, that probably is a bigger need when you're looking at 745 projected at Heritage.
Right. Our immediate need will be looking at attendance boundaries. Our next immediate
Yep.
need is really
Right.
looking at what are some of those pieces that you're just bringing up, Mark? And the next piece is kind of what does that look like as far as when do we get to that new school piece? That's kind of the progression of some of the discussions we've got to have.
Okay. Fascinating.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Happy holidays.
Great. Thanks, Mark.
I noticed.
So the items that Mark presented, we kind of absorbed them in a relatively quick time frame here. So we will be bringing some of those pieces back. but at least gives us the kind of the concept of really what we're dealing with. And none of these are eminent that we have to have decisions right away, but it's things that as we start to put pieces together here over the next number of months, we're going to be bringing these chunks back to really have some further discussion on.
Next, we have administrative report and consideration of special ed staffing.
Yes, in your packet, you'll see a memo from Kurt Ely. Kurt and I have been having conversations throughout the school year with regards to some of the needs that we have within our buildings, particularly with serving our special education students at the elementary level. Tonight, we are asking for 3 special education para positions. One at Heritage, one at Prairie, and one at Arboretum. These are all based off, as you can see from our notes, based off of student needs that either have been present since the beginning of the school year or some things within programming needs that have changed that we need to work to address. So for those 3 positions, we are looking to use the contingency fund as we looked at different funding models. That will allow us to access the aid that comes along with our special education aid, as it would be part of our Fund 10 budget. Our contingency right now sits at about $70,000. The cost of those paras is projected at $51,000. The other item that we are looking for consideration from the board is a sign language interpreter. We have a student who will be moving into our district whose IEP calls for a full-time sign language interpreter. This would be a position that Kurt would look to fund through our federal flow-through grant, and we are working on the costing per that. That one's a little bit harder to determine and to fill, and Kurt is working diligently on that, but we're looking for your support this evening to move forward with exploring that and hiring that as we're able to. So we realize that this is kind of 4 big pieces, 3 paras, and a sign language interpreter. The funding is outlined in your memo through contingency and flow-through grant, but they're all directly tied to specific student needs that we see at those buildings.
I would move approval of these requests as presented.
Second.
Peggy, second by Jack. Any discussion? Mark?
And it's just out of curiosity, I guess, but in regards to the para hires, and Kurt, maybe you could respond to this, do you anticipate a pool of trained paras with the skill set you need, or do they get trained once they get here?
Well, I'm hoping for some applications at all. We've had a couple of these posted for a while, and in fact, I've been working with Sheila and Dean to schedule interviews. We actually had a para leave the district a few weeks ago, so we did interviews at Arboretum to fill that position. And we had a pool of 2 applicants for that position. At the Prairie position that we kind of posted in anticipation of approval tonight, we have a pool of 4. 2 of them are the 2 that we interviewed for the Arboretum pool. One of them declined an interview, so now we're down to 2. Are they trained? Some have experience, some don't, and then we provide them with whatever training that they need when we get them. It's hard to find people right now.
So would you say that in general, or one of the things we've heard for a while is our pay differs quite a bit and there's a pay gap? How much do you think our pay rate is affecting our ability to attract candidates?
I don't know if that's as big of an issue as just the job market in general is really tight right now. If you look around town, whether it be here in Waunakee or Madison or wherever, everybody seems to be hiring people right now, so there just doesn't seem to be a lot of people available for jobs. Might there be some relationship to the pay? Maybe, but I can't say that people ask that in interview. When we do interviews, they aren't really asking that, and that tends to not be a determiner if they accept a position or not. I don't know for sure.
Just an extent, I appreciate the situation. The last 2 years I've heard concerns from staff about not having necessary training to deal with some of the kids. And my concern is we hire someone with minimal training, and I know you are limited by the applicants.
Yep.
But then how do we provide them the tool sets so that we can hang on to them? And they
Yeah.
have a successful experience both for the students' sake and retaining them as well, which is kind of one of our joint concerns.
What we have done, if we can, some of it's just on timing of when
Right.
we need to get people in and people
Yep.
available.
Yep.
But what we have done in a few instances is we've brought a person in while we've had a substitute in place for that position, and we'll bring that person in at the same time we have the substitute in place, so then that allows them to spend some time shadowing, spending some time with teachers to get some of that information. Hopefully with some of the new structuring that you're going to be doing and talking about as far as allowing people to move up in some of those categories or lanes or whatever you want to describe it, it's going to allow us to have some staff development on a more formal basis than what we do now. It's very limited because a lot of our paraeducators, they want to be on the same schedule as their children. So when we have a staff development day, while we can offer staff development, they may not come in for that because then they have the expense of childcare because now their children are in school. So now they can't take advantage of some of the opportunities that we have. So some of that training it's a challenge with the structures that we have to be able to offer it. Because the kids are here.
Yep.
That's the challenge, is when the kids are here, people need to be with the kids. So.
Any other discussion? So we have a motion on the table, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you, Kurt.
Announcements.
We don't have any correspondence or announcements this evening.
So on to committee reports, starting with budget. Gary's not here, so Steve, maybe you'll just walk us through.
Sure, sounds good, John, thank you. So there's one action item and one informational item. The informational item is the 2018-19 budget timeline. Was reviewed with the budget committee and is included in your packet for your information. Later on tonight, when the board schedules special meetings, I would like consideration for adding the date in February. You'll see on the budget timeline, we are proposing a meeting in February like we had last year, where the board participated as well as the leadership team from the district. We are proposing that same meeting again in February. So we're hoping to schedule that at the end of the evening. But at this point, it's just provided for informational only reasons.
Did you say there was an action item?
The action item's the next one. We did review and consider the transportation contract at the budget committee meeting, forwarded on tonight for consideration. So we have provided that for your information. I did mention in the notes that the overwhelming majority of that document you already reviewed, approved, and submitted out as the bid process. What is really new is the end of the document, which is the page identified as performance standards and incentives. The budget committee actually has spent quite a bit of time on that, going back to last spring during the interview process of the transportation contractors, as well as continuing to work on that with the company that was selected, which is Lamers. So what you see tonight at the end of the agreement is really the finished product of that conversation that's been taking place since the vendor was selected last spring. This document was reviewed by the budget committee and forwarded on tonight for consideration from the full board.
So we do need a motion on that.
I so move we approve the contract to Lamers.
Second.
So moved by Mark, second by Peggy. Any other discussion on the Lamers contract? All in favor?
Aye.
Next we have HR committee We have no action item in the HR committee. I might suggest to the whole board to review a document in the original meeting. I think that it would be a good document for everybody to have some background on, just about kind of projection of where we're going with the HR committee and our discussions. Connie, do you want to add anything?
No, that covers it. The document will continue to be discussed and revised as we move forward.
Thank you. Co-curricular committee meeting?
I handed up the chair, didn't I?
Yes, you did share that one.
We do have several requests for new co-curriculars, and there was also a request for pay on one that's existed for the past couple of years. So those do have to get some form of.
So the recommendation that's coming out of the co-curricular committee is to add the aviation club, creative coders, which is at the middle school, computer science club at the high school, and the badminton club as new clubs to the high school and the middle school. Each of those are not requesting any additional dollars. They're requesting review after 3 years, at which point, if they're viable, that they would then be eligible for advisor pay. All 4 of those are student-generated clubs and interests where they have wanted to seek out a club in that area and then have found an advisor to assist them. The other item that Dave alluded to is the ATI, the Above the Influence Club. This is the group that worked with us at one of our recent linkage meetings. Ellen Gunder is our advisor for that. It's been a very successful club. It's been there for the 3 years, and we're requesting the pay for that club and looking at kind of where it falls within the pay structure. Connie and Brian have discussed it's very similar to our Justice League and Pay It Forward clubs at 2.5% of the base, otherwise at about $900. So those are our recommendations that were coming out of the co-curricular committee. You could take those as one motion if you so chose. Otherwise, you could break them out if you wanted to as well.
I move we approve the 4 new clubs and the pay for the ATI club.
I second that.
Any discussion? I strongly support the pay for the ATI. Yes, work
Great call.
there is phenomenal. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Curriculum committee, minutes were at your seats when you came in. I think there is one action item. So who wants to report out on that?
We'll let Tim give the highlights.
Hi, Tim.
Hi, how's it going, everybody? So there was a vote on an item, but it's not going to be an action item here
okay.
yet.
Alright.
There's a proposal that's come out of the high school that Brian and I have brought forward to make an adjustment to the way we transcript when students withdraw from a course or drop a course. And so we explained it with the curriculum committee. They took a position in support of it. Next stop will be the policy committee because our grading system's actually in policy.
Okay.
So through the quick moving policy process, you can expect it in 2 or 3 months here. Other than that,
We have lots of good news. We reviewed the state report cards, and we also got an update on the digital learning plan, especially as it relates to the high school and the whole discussion with one-to-one on
More to
Chromebooks and
come.
cards.
more to come.
More to come. It was discussion.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
And, so we just have a real quick walkthrough on the accountability report cards. Again, these are all in your packets. I'm just going to kind of touch on a few highlights and then open it up for questions. Again, these are pieces we've had for a half decade now in Wisconsin. They're required under a variety of statutes. Schools receive a score on a 0 to 100 range. It's calculated in different ways. No single one of our buildings has exactly the same weighting. This has to do with the student population characteristics and the different levels. But it's generally grouped into 4 areas, and it's almost all off of standardized assessments.
There are 5 rating levels, but we're only going to really focus on the top 2 this evening. The district and 4 of the 6 schools place in the highest level, significantly exceeds, and 2 of our schools place in the second highest level, the exceeds. And so, you know, overall, that's pretty much in line with our past performance. Very pleased with that. This shows kind of the schools at a glance and where their components come from. The 2 NAs on there, Arboretum did not have, so closing gaps for Arboretum is based on the demographics of the 3rd and 4th grade combined. Basically, the kind of targeted populations you need to calculate the closing gaps number we did not have enough of at Arboretum, so there was no closing gap score for Arboretum. And then the high school, no high school in the state that's a 912 high school has a growth measure because you need year-to-year state testing for that. Just in terms of kind of where the district placed, district score is on the top. Within the 16 Dane County districts, you can kind of see where our position was. Our benchmark group of 27 districts, and we are one of the 27, you can kind of see where we ranked in there. And of course, we picked the benchmark group because it's a more, it's more kind of tailored to kind of, you know, our institutional characteristics, so we would expect to be kind of in a more middle pack position there. District detail, again, you can see as you break down into the achievement, growth, and gaps components, strongest, lowest. You know, one thing I want to point out, graduation gaps is showing as our lowest area. That's in part because the high schools at that stage where instead of having a targeted group that's like students with disabilities or economically disadvantaged, they're in the super group, which is English language learners, students with disabilities, and economically disadvantaged combined as kind of an assortment, versus all of the non-English language learners, non-students with disabilities, non-economically disadvantaged. And so our overall performance has been pretty steady, but the state comparison group has been trending up. Most of the super groups for high school graduation have been kind of similar to us. It's kind of a technical feature of that calculation. So again, the conclusion, overall, very positive picture. What does it mean for us? We continue to focus on our most significant priority area in terms of scoring, which is the closing gaps. We look to stay where we're strong on student achievement and on track. And even though our growth outcomes are good, that's a very critical area as well, so we really want to, you know, monitor that carefully too. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions.
It's a reflection of our staff.
Reflection, you know, and I want to say is, you know, I will say that it's mostly based on standardized assessments, doesn't reflect everything we value as a system, but obviously our students and our teachers have worked very hard, and this is emblematic of that. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Tim.
And getting down to the end here, consent agenda, which is a pretty long list. But again, we can take it all at once unless somebody wants to pull up.
Motion to approve the entire consent agenda.
Motion by Dave,
Second.
second by Jack.
Question of clarification, so included in that was the financial audit and an update on that. Are you asking for approval at this time, because we're gonna talk about that more in depth at the budget committee, correct?
Yes, that's correct. So what I'm looking for is it's included in for approval tonight, but I did mention in the notes that I'm looking for more of an in-depth discussion at the budget committee level to review the letter that was provided from our audit firm. Again, this was their first year auditing us. They spent a significant amount of time in our district. They provided a more detailed report than what you've seen in the past from our previous auditors. And I want to have more of a detailed discussion on that in the budget committee during the next monthly meeting.
So then I would respectfully request that we pull that item. It doesn't make sense to me to have the full board approve it and then for us to have opportunity to look at it more in depth in committee. I did appreciate you including it tonight because I thought that would be helpful for the committee discussion.
Sure.
If anyone from the full board had questions or comments based on what they saw in the report, we could flesh that out. So I would respectfully request we pull that one item.
And then just run it through budget, and then bring it back to the board, is that what your request is?
That would be my preference.
Any concerns with that, Steve?
No, and to Julie's point, the timing of it, we did have a budget committee meeting. The audit was due the Friday after the meeting to the
Yeah.
DPI. So the budget committee has not had an opportunity to see it yet, so that would make perfect
We'll
sense.
just pull it.
And unless Gary's not here. And
Yep.
there's a lot in it.
There
It's-
is, yep.
So then the
We have
initial
to
motion is.
An amendment to the motion to pull the audit report.
Second.
So how do we have to do this?
You then vote on the amendment?
Yeah, the
Go back.
person
vote
who
on the
had made
amendment
the
first.
motion has to agree to the amendment.
Okay.
Friendly amendments really
Yes.
aren't allowed. So you vote on the amendment, and then you go back and vote on the motion either as amended or not amended, depending on how the vote goes.
So you have an amendment that it's been
Jack motioned
pulled,
it.
and Jack seconded. So any discussion on the amendment? All in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
So now we go and vote on
Motion.
The motion that was on the table originally,
Okay.
As
Yeah.
amended.
As amended.
as amended.
Yep.
Any discussion on that? On any other items in the consent agenda? I'm so glad you're here, Dave, to help us through.
There you go.
I had a class on this in college. It was
I
great.
love that. I did not.
You were smarter than I was. I wasted a quarter, I wasted three.
Not
three
wasted, see, you
credits.
just didn't know.
So, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Very good.
And agendas?
I think what we're looking at, first of all, just a reminder about the convention. So anybody who's going to convention, please communicating with Rebecca. Anything you need to add on that, Rebecca?
Early bird deadline is Friday, and I would actually like to start registering people tomorrow or Wednesday, so if you can let me know tonight, I'd appreciate it.
Do you need us to fill out anything?
No, I just need, I'll look it over tomorrow for specifics, but I just need to know if you are going to the convention, if you want to do any special pre-convention workshops. And I have to be honest, I haven't looked up deeply into them.
There's breakfast Thursday morning.
And then the
Breakfast Thursday
breakfast, yes.
Very good. All right, going into agendas, or meetings. We have a pretty tight turnaround between now and our January meeting, but there are a few things we want to just clarify. Budget committee, we would like to have something on January 3rd, 4th, or 5th. If it were, I would probably recommend, for me, it would be the 3rd would work better. Just checking to see if we have, obviously I'm not sure what Gary's schedule is, so we could either hold on that, we could kind of try and schedule that once we know what his schedule is, or we could try to put a tentative date together. So January 3rd, would there be availability for a budget committee?
Yes, except I had a question mark about an insurance committee meeting as well, so I
Yes.
would want the time to be different. But
Okay. Do you have a time that you'd prefer on the 3rd if we did a budget that day?
do you want it in the morning, Steve?
Doesn't matter to me.
Sure. Either one's fine.
What time?
I've got a meeting at 4:30, so I've got stuff in at 4:30, 5:30, 6 o'clock time frame.
So you're looking at 8 o'clock?
What works for you?
Yeah.
8 o'clock on the 3rd, does that work for you, Julie?
Definitely.
Okay. All right. The other piece is we have our special meeting linkage meeting on the 10th with the Justice League. We've already set that as a meeting, I just need to know a time. So I think we've normally done those around 4 o'clock, 4:30. It'd be no more than a 2-hour meeting.
The 10th of what is that?
That's the 10th of January. So we had already set that meeting as a tentative date, I believe, at the last meeting. Is that correct, Rebecca? Or we earmarked it at least.
We earmarked
Yeah,
it because
so-
we actually had set something else and then it didn't work out,
Right, so I confirmed that with Larry. So Larry Hale and his group are available. I had tentatively put in 4:30, but we could,
I would likely have a conflict at that time.
is there a better time, Julie, that would work, or just that day doesn't really work well?
Later would be better, but don't turn yourself inside out for me because I'll just come and catch up.
All right.
And the students are involved.
Yeah,
Students are
so
involved.
it should work with what works for the students and so on.
Yeah, you go too late, half of
Yeah.
them will be gone.
Correct, Amanda.
So what time is that, 4:30?
I have 4:30, I mean, I think is early, that's probably a good time, because I would look at probably holding this over at Heritage in
LGA.
thank you.
Heritage.
Yeah, we'll hold it at the large group area,
And you're looking at maybe 2 hours?
max of 2 hours.
So you want a formal motion for that?
Sure, why don't we just say that the 10th at 4:30 at Heritage?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The other one, I just want to get on the.
Just one, I may be 20 minutes late for it, that was.
Just trying to get a few things out there so that we can plan accordingly. Facilities Committee, we're looking at something in the January 29th range. This is something so that we can get some things planned ahead of time. This is where we would be going over the long-range facility maintenance plan that we've been working on with Findorf. So would something in the week of the 29th work for the Facilities Committee?
Anything but the 29th.
How about 30th?
Good for me.
30th at, is there a time? Is there a good time for you?
Tuesday.
Anything after 4? 4:30?
4:30?
4:30.
4:30 would be great. So let's do facilities on January 30th at 4:30. And then the other one Steve alluded to during his budget discussion was a board leadership meeting where we would meet with the leadership team, administration, and the board, really talking about kind of a budget workshop. We're looking at February 19th.
February 19th.
Yep, so I'm
It's a
jumping way
special
ahead
meeting.
here. Let's get that on the books and get that advertised.
And would that be like a earlier one again, like 4?
Yeah, I would say that would probably be one we could do.
I can't do the night. Well, how long would this be?
It could be any time that week. That's a 2-hour meeting.
Okay, I can't do the 19th.
Is there another date that week that would work?
Any other day for
Do you have a preference, Steve? How about Tuesday, the 20th? And does 4 o'clock work? Jack, what works for you as far as a time?
I gotta check that week. I gotta double check that week.
All right.
Any chance it could be the next week?
Sure.
The 26th?
Yeah, it could be the next week is fine. Just somewhere in that time frame would be good. So if we want to do like the 26th or 27th?
I can't do the 26th.
How about the 27th?
Yeah, 27.
27th, that work for everybody?
Sure, yep.
Why don't we just get that, why don't we just tentatively earmark that as our board, administration, teacher leadership team, budget workshop?
And we saying 4:30-ish or something?
Yeah, why don't we say 4:30? And that's a 2-hour meeting.
Do you want a motion on that one?
Yes, please.
So move.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Yep. And I think the rest of our meetings we will look at our January meeting.
Do you want to schedule a
Did you need a curriculum one, Tim?
We probably need a policy.
Policy, let's,
What do you want to kind of, we don't.
it'll probably be into January,
Okay.
so we can, do you need curriculum?
Ideally to bring in kind of
Yep.
the next installment.
Yep.
So, I mean, in a perfect world, the afternoon of the 3rd or the 4th, if that work for the committee,
We're talking January?
January.
So the 3rd, I already have this insurance committee thing, probably.
Right. When did we just
Insurance
do,
committee's at what time?
That's 3 to 5 that night.
when did we just do budget?
8 a.m. that day.
Oh, that was
8
that
a.m.
one.
on the 3rd.
So I mean, if you, well, would Thursday the 4th work?
I currently don't have anything
Not before 4:30.
Jack, how does that week look for you?
I'm sorry, which week?
January
January 4th is the one we're looking at right now, it's a Thursday.
Yeah, right, that's probably okay
Okay, so maybe 4:30?
for me. 4:30?
Does that work for you, Mark, or would a little later be good?
Later would be better, but I'll fudge the schedule if I have to.
Well, I mean, I guess the other thing would be, would you just want to do Wednesday, the 3rd at 5, and just kind of keep, I mean,
Oh.
it's really your choice.
Okay, well, that works for me.
With the
I don't
That
care.
would work.
That
If
would work?
Julie doesn't mind.
I don't mind if that's what's still okay with Jack.
Yeah.
Wednesday the 5th at 5 instead,
Yeah.
or the 3rd, excuse me.
Third.
The third.
Steve, do you think you guys would be?
You get triple overtime on that day?
Sure.
You have 3 meetings that day, Julie.
I'll definitely be around.
We'll set up.
We'll bring the wine.
You will not be out of town on
You know how we have those
that.
like flexible office spaces you can contract into? We'll
There you
do
go.
that during the interval in the day for you.
Right.
So
So,
thank you.
Tim, the only thing is, if I'm fine with you moving ahead with it, I won't be able to be there on the 3rd. I have another meeting that evening, so.
Okay.
So
You
can-
could use
but-
a
But
break.
you can keep it and move it ahead.
Okay.
I have our special board meeting, curriculum board meeting on January 15th.
Yes.
In my
Yes.
calendar. Okay,
Yeah.
what time is that?
4 o'clock.
4 o'clock.
Okay, and we always,
We already set that one.
Which one is that?
That's the curriculum updates.
yeah, like.
January
when is that?
15th?
That's the
Yeah,
15th of
we've had that
January.
scheduled for a
Yes.
long time.
Yes, yes. Special
Yeah.
board meeting.
January
scheduled that
becomes
this
quite
summer,
busy
didn't we?
right in the
Social
beginning.
Yes.
studies, yes. and
Martin Luther
2
King
of our
Day.
minis for CTE.
What is that?
How long is that
January?
meeting supposed to be
January
for?
from 4 to
2
6.
hours.
It's 2 hours.
Yeah, we kind of hit, with how things got pushed, they got
So,
really,
do we have food at all these special meetings?
we already approved that one.
That one was on the
But if you don't want
Yeah, that one we already approved.
Is that encouraged to come if we
There you
have
go.
food?
That's the only thing that'll get me there.
That's right.
Okay,
We're done.
The
motion
other one
to
they have
adjourn.
Food
So
that
moved.
is the
Great.
budget.
Thank you
and,
all.
we're-
Okay, we have a first to adjourn. Anybody else want to?
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you all,
Have a
appreciate your
great
patience.
evening.